It's fantastic, as I said, to have an opportunity to gather again. Really great to see everyone. I might just ask you to mute your mics just while we go through our presentations. I'm sure a huge amount has happened to each of your projects in the interim since our first workshop on September the 8th. I know that some of you have recruited project managers. Hello to the Kremlin team. Others have issued a creative brief and selected your creative collaborators. That's Dingle. And many of you have held your first or indeed several public meetings like Rising. And Kate Delaney and I have been lucky enough to attend some of these. It is kind of hard to believe that 5 months have passed since the initial announcement of the successful 14 projects. We actually are now 15 projects, thanks to some additional funding that Creative Ireland had unspent this year. We have partnered with Bohemians Football Club in Dublin. So you will be hearing from Sean McCabe later about this project. Sean is the first ever climate justice officer for a football club in the world. Following our first gathering in September, we issued you a short survey immediately after that. And many of you asked for a follow-up workshop specifically devoted to evaluation. So we have listened to you and here we are. And I suppose what I want to stress is that today is about learning and supporting. It's not about judging. The evaluation toolkit that we have shared with you is intended as a guide and a support. What we wanted to do was set out clearly what we mean when we talk about activities, output and impact. There can sometimes be a certain kind of confusion between those categories. So we thought it was best to be crystal clear. And really at the heart of it, the idea behind this toolkit is to help you tell your stories, to help you communicate the impact of your projects, and then to help us essentially make the case that the fund has been a success and for future funding, to be frank. This is the first fund of its kind in the country. It's the first time that there has been an explicit and direct link between environmental policy and cultural policy at a ministerial level. It's the first time there's been a call for proposals that sought to marry the artistic and creative talent, ideas that are firmly rooted in the community, and that can also involve local authorities and academic partners. And all these elements squarely aimed at changing individual behaviour. So I think we recognise that this is hard work, and we know that it's difficult to measure impacts. We also know that we're going to learn as much from what hasn't worked as much as what has. So really, in other words, don't panic about the toolkit. Apart from the Creative Ireland Programme Office, joining us today are some of our colleagues from the Department of Climate Action, who are our partners in Creative Climate Action, and also sitting in are representatives from Pobble. So I hope that all of you would have received an e-newsletter from Kate Delaney about a new €5 million fund for climate projects that Pobble is administering. And they're all about, if I have it right, education, capacity building, learning by doing, and quite frankly, they are open to universities, charities, community and voluntary groups. So I know that some of you will be applying to Pobble for additional funding for your projects. And obviously separately, there's a whole fund available exclusively to local authorities. So just to say that at the end of this event today, we'll be issuing you with another quick survey this afternoon, just for you, just to capture, was there anything we didn't cover today that you wanted to cover? I'm really looking forward to hearing the three projects talk about their approach to evaluation. So they had a site of our toolkit in draft form, and basically they've set out their evaluation process using the toolkit as a framework. So I'm going to hand you over to Colleen, who just whip you through the agenda. We've allowed lots of time built in for Q&A after individual presentations and at the end, and just for a general exchange of views and ideas. So over to you, Colleen.
Thanks, Tanya. Hi, everybody, and welcome. We're also joined by Murray, who are doing the kind of deep dive evaluation with some of the projects. I know they've been in contact with some of you But I think it's really interesting what Tanya was saying as well, is like the evaluation is a learning exercise. It also might be useful for you for making your case for funding from other people. So the more you can track and show the effectiveness of what you're doing, obviously that can help. But, you know, we'd like it to be honest, and it is a learning thing for everybody here. So today we're going to go through, Kate Delaney is going to give us another overview of the toolkit, just to go through it with you, highlight some of the issues. Please, at every stage, feel free to put questions or queries or observations in the chat box. Myself and Kate Cunningham, just to confuse you, will be taking note of this, and we'll put those back into the discussion afterwards. We'll be finished, Kate's session will be finished, and we'll have time to take questions around the evaluation toolkit and any other observations you have. Then we're going to get our first presentation from Corchaguina at 12:40, who are going to take us through how they would use that toolkit, or how they're planning on using that toolkit on their own project. Obviously, everybody is in early stages, so these are some initial thoughts, but I think it's really useful to see a practical version of it. So Claire's going to take us through that. We're having a coffee break at 1 o'clock to give you time for a coffee and a sandwich. And then and like my Irish fails me at that point, at 1:10. So she's going to be taking us through that bilingually, so that's going to be excellent. And then we're going to have a Oscail Garish, Línshin Afariga, at 13 at 1:30. So after each of those presentations, there's 5 minutes for questions. And when we've had all three presentations, again, we're going to come off screen. Really want you to ask us questions, any questions you have for us. You can ask the projects. Please, Murray are there as experts as well, so feel free to ask them. So we're just really interested to hear, you know, what thoughts it provokes. So we'll leave plenty of time for discussion at the end. Wrap up at 2:30, and obviously Creative Ireland and MCO are here if there's anything that you want to follow up on as well, and we'll give a summary of any of the discussion back, or any of the questions we'll get back in touch with you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kate Delaney from Creative Ireland, who's going to take us through this.
That's great. Thanks a million, Colleen, and welcome everyone. It's really nice to see that a lot of the faces are becoming more and more familiar as we move along. So thanks for joining today. So I'm going to go through the evaluation toolkit, which was circulated prior to this call, and hopefully you've had some opportunity to go through it in advance. So as you all know, and as Tanya pointed out, climate action behaviour impact are essential components of the Creative Ireland Climate Action Fund. Each project will have identified the impact it wants to have on local community and wider society. The Creative Climate Action Fund, it was designed to support creative, cultural and artistic projects that build awareness around climate change and empower citizens to make meaningful behavioural changes. This toolkit was designed to help project teams capture their data, demonstrate the effect of your work and the results and learnings. Identifying the goals, outputs and impacts of your project is also important for the Creative Ireland programme final project report, which we will ask you to reflect on these areas. That's available in Appendix 1 of the evaluation toolkit, but is also outlined in the service level agreements. So as it is the first fund of its kind, and also with funding coming through, kindly coming through Department of Environment, Climate and Communications through the Climate Action Fund, the evaluation and UCC's evaluation and the end of project report together, they're all very important aspects for future policy and funding decisions, and to determine the impact of the creative and cultural sector in engaging the public on climate action, and just trying to capture what worked, what didn't work, and what can we learn going forward. So if we want to go on to the next slide. So here we'll just take you through the transition as you move from the goals of your project to the impact. So what are your overall goals and objectives of the project, and what you hope to achieve in relation to climate action? So in order to measure the impact of your activities, you first really need to clearly identify the goals or objectives of your project. So are you aiming to change an attitude, encourage behaviour, or empower people to act? The changes can come about by facilitating an increase in, say, for example, capabilities, i.e. learning, training, giving tools to change, motivation, getting people to feel more empowered to change or take action, or opportunities and removing barriers to action and change. So some of that examples of goals could be, for example, better food sovereignty at a local level. A local area becomes a more energy efficient town. The local residents or local community reduce consumption of everyday items, or you're hoping most of these projects are community based, so you're hoping to build a network of community climate heroes. And then as we move down through the activities, so how are you planning on engaging with people? What inputs and activities will bring about these goals? So really the activities are the tools you would use to engage with people to bring about the changes that are outlined in the goals and objectives. So there's we're really excited to see like a wide variety of activities lined up between now and 2022. For example, exhibitions, workshops, installations, repair cafes, communal meals. There's a really wide breadth of really creative activities that are lined up across your projects. So, and then as we move on, that brings us to output. What were your deliverables? What was produced because of those inputs and activities, and how many people were engaged? And we'll look at outputs in more detail in a few minutes. And then we move on to the impact. So what was the end impact? What was individual and collective behavior or attitudinal change or climate action that this project was able to bring about? And we'll look at that in more detail now in a few minutes also. So if we want to move on then to the next slide. So this is where we get into the real, I suppose, meat of the evaluation process. So your outputs. The outputs of your project, they're the interactions or engagements that arise from your activities. It is really important to identify how you will record these figures from the project outset, because they're indicators of the progress and reach. So that may be direct engagement, who participated or visited your project through events or workshops, and indirect engagement, so visits and time spent on websites, social media engagement, or press coverage. So some examples may be 100 people attended your exhibition to increase awareness of energy wastage. 100 local items in the community were repaired and documented. There are 5,000 visitors to the website to read stories of climate action, or locals make use of and regularly visit a garden. They're just some examples. So we can move on to the next slide. So on to measuring those outputs. And I guess it's really important to identify how you will record these key figures from the project outset, as they are the indicators of the progress and reach of your project. They're also very important, I suppose, in the context of the required end of project report. There are many ways to measure outputs, and the evaluation toolkit goes into greater detail in this regard to support you and give you ideas in terms of how you might want to measure. So you can measure attendance at events. It may, whether they be ticketed or unticketed. Even if they are unticketed, you may still want to use an event booking site such as Eventbrite. You may want to measure participation at workshops, for example, through sign-in sheets. Estimates from outdoor events could be achieved from the likes of clickers as people go in. There's also some ideas from the Irish Street Art Circus and Spectacle. They offer some good methods of counting attendance at events such as those. Social media engagement and followers. And it's important to note that, existing accounts should be recorded before your project so that you could demonstrate growth or changes in engagement as your project moves on. Website traffic, so website hits. And again, if it's an existing site, it should be measured before and after your project to demonstrate any increases. Google Analytics could support you tracking the number of visitors to your site. And as well as just users, you may want to track the number of returning visitors and session duration or pages viewed, so you can understand the depth of engagement that you're getting from your audience. There's also, indicators through reach on newspaper, TV, radio coverage. It's really useful also to create a table where you track your figures week on week, and it'll allow you to document the changes over the course of the project. Maybe you get a big bump after a major event or a launch of one aspect of your projects. It'd be really interesting to see that. Just a reminder, I suppose, at this point as well, is we have a shared folder available that you all know, and it'd just be important or really useful if you wanted to share your website addresses with the other project partners, also your social media accounts, so everyone knows where you are and where you're trying to reach a wider audience. Okay, so we just move on to the next slide as we move on to impact evaluation and behavior change. So we move on again. So I suppose the impact of your project should relate to the overall goal and the objective of your project. And we're stressing here, we know behavior change is complex and it can be really difficult to make long-lasting social change through one project or campaign. This is because changing attitudes and beliefs are important, but they don't always change behavior. Behavior is obviously influenced by internal and external factors, such as infrastructure, social norms, or economic context. But at the outset of your project, you will have identified the change in behavior or attitude that you hope your activities will bring about. Your impact evaluation should measure to what extent this has happened and what changes look like. Projects that are successful in changing behavior or attitudes would usually have a clear understanding of the behavior or attitude they want to change from the get-go. And I suppose this evaluation, again, will stress it's not, we're not saying everything is going to work. It's going to see what didn't work and trying to identify why that might be. So if we move on to the next, this is a great table. We have this table as an example in the evaluation toolkit, and it kind of gives an overview of examples by theme across the goals, activities, and outputs. But we've really highlighted here the direct impact and behavior change, just to demonstrate what we mean by that. So there's some great examples here. For example, attendees report buying 10% of groceries from local producers instead of the supermarket. 20 households decide to retrofit more eco-efficient energy. Individuals begin repairing regularly rather than buying new. 20 families plant their own biodiverse gardens. Community groups empowered to discuss local flood prevention solutions, or 10 people feeling more capable to take action to address climate issues. And underneath it, you can also see there's indirect impacts that impact the local community and wider society. So I suppose we know, and we can see across the wide range of themes in these projects that there's real opportunity here to get some really a lasting behavior change. So next slide. So here we just go through measuring impact. So again, we just really want to make sure that we define the behavior or attitude that you would hope your activities could bring about. Does the change address capabilities? So are you building knowledge, skills, or abilities? Is it providing opportunities within social contexts, daily routines and norms, or breaking down barriers? Is it providing additional motivation, aligning with lived decision-making processes of people? From there, we make sure we build a baseline. So ensuring that we collect data at the outset of your project. Ask your audience or participants a small number of very simple yet effective questions about the change you want to examine. And then also there's great resources for, to use national statistics like the Eurobarometer, which can provide you with good data on many issues relating to climate change and climate action. So from there, you ensure that you effectively, collect your data. You use any resources that are available, using surveys, focus groups, workshops. Ask your audience simple and pertinent questions, including how many people said their behavior or attitude would change. What do these changes look like? Why do those changes take place? And we move on to the next slide. So to help you, this will be outlined in the evaluation toolkit. So to help you identify the impact of your project and to help the Creative Climate Action team assess the impact of the fund as a whole, there are 5 questions we would like to be applied across the projects. And we hope these are, these questions such as these are relevant across any project or any theme. So the first few are linked to kind of a Likert scale, which is number one, I am more informed about climate change. So the answers there would range from strongly disagree up to strongly agree. Number two, I feel more empowered to take action after participating in this event, ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And the creative aspect of this project made me feel more engaged with climate action. And if they strongly agree, explain in more detail. Number four is multiple choice. So do you plan on taking action or making changes to your behavior or lifestyle after attending this event or participating in this project? And they can answer multiple choice there. And then if yes, what area do you plan on taking action? And they can rank up to 3. So there's, I suppose, these are relevant across a lot of the themes, but we also have other in there, and they can specify in more detail how that might be. So then just to mention again, we do have, as I said earlier, the final report for the Creative Ireland programme is in the surface level agreement, and it's required for all recipients of grant funding to see if deliverables and outcomes were achieved. So we have that in the surface level agreement, but we've also put it as an appendix in the evaluation toolkit. I just wanted to point out that under the section of other additional findings, we would really be interested to hear from yourselves, from the partners, on learnings and findings as they participate in these projects, what you felt worked and didn't work, what other partners did you connect with or learn from, or what was the key moment of impact for your project. And we're also think it's really important to hear about the creative reflections. So for the artists and creative practitioners that are participating in the project, what was the role there? How did you find the balance between engaging the public in climate action and the artistic and creative aspect of the project, and just overall creative feedback or reflection? So you will see that pointed out in the evaluation toolkit. So I suppose that is a whistle-stop tour through the evaluation toolkit. Hopefully that made it a bit more clear, but we do have plenty of time for some questions if we want to run them now.
Great, Kate. Two things came up in the chat there, so I might just ask the people who raised the issues. It was about registration and actual participation. So I know the original question came from Marianne Harris. Marianne, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. We just did our evaluation report. We just completed it for Dublin Climate Action Week, which was the first time we held this type of event. And, we had the 4 local authorities involved. So we were just looking across the board at how much uptake there was. So how many people actually registered and then how many people actually participated. And one of the things is they're very different figures. So if you just measure registration, you'll find that actually only about half attended on average. Now it was interesting, like one local authority had the lowest number of registrations for its events, but they actually had the highest participation rate, So yeah, so like they had 71% participation, whereas everybody else had just under 50%, but they had less people registering. So basically we had a lot more flaky people in the other local authorities, and the people in that local authority really came when they said they would come to something. But we are restricted, even our filming events that were outdoors in public parks, we had to set out pods at the time for people to sit in with their families physically because of social distancing at the time. So capacity, even in a big urban park for an outdoor film on climate change, was very restricted. So I think, I don't know if there's a model or some way to estimate that, because you're only getting, we couldn't accommodate everybody who wanted to book.
Well, Marianne, I might take that. I think similar to what Colleen said, we already do that within Creative Ireland. We have a number of how many people register and how many people continue to end of webinar. And like you say, in some cases, well, not like this, everybody who's RSVP just turned up, but our public events, we're seeing, yeah, about a 50% knockoff rate, but we register both, and that's dead easy. How many people registered on Eventbrite? How many people stayed on the webinar to the end? So we just capture both those figures. So I would suggest that that might be the way to go. As you say, there is fatigue setting in. We all recognize that, but that's okay. If you can give both of those, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I think we have like a Caro newsletter, and we're looking at how many people sign up for that, and maybe we start trying to promote that with the replies to people when they registered. So maybe there's other measures that we can look at, but I think it's like, I know with Kremlin, they've been trying to plan the launch, and it's been really frustrating because of the optics as well. So even if you can have
Oh, Marianne, you froze there. Just while Marianne is coming back in, I think she raises a very interesting. Sorry, you froze there, Marianne.
School children, just the optics. What's that? Oh, sorry. Did you lose me there? Yeah. So just the optics, where we had school children with the minister, but even the minister's office were conscious of not looking too crowded in the picture, and all this. So it frames how you visually even sculpt an event, because you're trying to portray people together, but not really together, Yeah,
it's challenging. Thanks, Marianne. There's also a question there from Maura O'Keefe. Maura, are you there? Would you like to share? And if you want to put your hand up as well.
I'm just wondering if I know there is a certain amount of fatigue, but I think there's also a certain degree of enthusiasm that more people are inclined to sign up for an online event because they hope to, because it's easier to actually attend. You don't have to leave your desk. And so I would wonder about comparing what might have been previously expected for in-person events, as opposed to, because sometimes I think we see drop off from registration to attendance as a negative, when that might not be the accurate reading on what the enthusiasm, if that makes sense. That maybe previously 100 people might have attended in person and 200 are attending online, or 20 are attending online. It's comparing those figures is probably more accurate in terms of measuring enthusiasm or actual attendance, sort of.
I think that it depends, I guess, on the project more, would be my sense. In some cases, none of this has ever been done before. So there probably isn't a baseline of, I would have expected this number in person and now I'm getting that online. Yeah. I mean, if you've done plenty of them before and you've something to compare it to, great. But my sense is that for most of these projects, in many cases, this is the first ever time these partners work together and the first ever event of its kind.
Yeah.
I think, Maura, sorry, just before we go to Owen's question, the other thing, just coming from a media and a kind of theatre support background, once you have, even attendance is a win, or sorry, even registration is a win, if you can also put in a permission to recontact. Because what you can do is tape it, send it to them. So, that is something worth thinking about when you're designing it, to ask for permission to recontact. Because it allows you to do it. So it is a win, like whether they show up and flaky or busy or whatever term we want to do. I also am really curious, Marianne, about what that one place that the people actually showed up did that was different. Was that through personal word of mouth? Was it a smaller district? It's kind of interesting.
It was the city centre versus the wider county. And the city centre had lower numbers attending, but more people sticking with it, I guess. Or the other question we had was, how many of these are actually the same people? So are they signing up for loads of the events for the week, and they're kind of the diehards, or what's your real? The funny thing is, I know from conversations in my community with like school teachers in the school that they knew about our events. So maybe not everybody has time to attend it, but maybe they're actually aware, at least, and they're talking about it in class with the kids. So they are, they're talking about climate action, even if they're not physically at every webinar.
Absolutely. Owen, you from Waterford, you had a question there, or an observation? Sorry.
Yeah, it's just an observation that certain groups that we might be targeting or that we might be trying to reach out to may be much more it might be more difficult to reach them online, and that's something that I suppose needs just to be taken into account. Because we certainly had in mind in devising our project that we would be meeting people in person. We would be having public meetings to try and draw where we can't identify an actual existing group or organization. You know, so that's challenging.
And Orla, you just have an observation about sensitive, which is something that goes to the design, whether it's online or offline, I imagine. Are you there, Orla?
Yeah, I just had a point about, I suppose, taking care for sensitivities within communities. So, for example, we're quite aware that we need to build relationship with the community we're working with, and we need to build trust, and that we don't want to feel that they're being put under kind of a microscope. And so while we're very conscious of evaluation and we have an evaluation method in mind, I suppose we're very conscious that we don't put a community on edge from the outset. And so just about adjusting the questions and the timing of questions carefully, and that might need to just be on a case-by-case basis or a project-by-project basis, because the 15 projects are very, very different in nature and context.
I would say, Orla, like you can shoot me, you and Bernadine from the IAF. If there are specific changes to those questions, do come back to us. We're well aware of the diversity of projects, but we are trying to have 5 simple questions asked of everybody, because if everybody says, oh, well, I'm doing my own set of questions, then it becomes impossible for us to look across projects. So if by any chance you can stick with those 5 questions, we would really appreciate it. If there's some really compelling reasons why you don't want to ask those questions, could you just come back to Kate Delaney? Because we haven't come up with this lightly. They are 5 fairly simple questions. Anything else is up to you. But those 5 we felt were not a huge ask.
I think maybe it's the idea of our job as informing communities about climate change. So, it's one thing to be creating a change with a community and creating an outcome and creating behavior change, but to be able to ask them, do you know more about climate change at the end of this project, is a little bit different than what we would have anticipated we were doing. So, and that's, that's just, it's a nuance there that I think, yeah.
Bernadine, what language would you suggest?
No, I mean, I think it's just even to do with the purpose of the funding and what we're trying to do here as well. So I have to have a think about it, and maybe it might be to do it how climate change affects you or your role. And there's something I'm not quite sure. It's just a difficult thing here, because it's not people know about climate change and the communities we're working with know about it. So what we're trying to do is maybe see what we can do about it.
And you don't think empowered covers that? No.
It's the first question.
The first one. Okay. I mean, we can tweak the wording, but it's back to Tanya's point, like it as well as your individual projects, which is obviously the main thing that you're concerned with. It is case making for the whole program as well.
I know. So we'll try and work a way around it, but we
so we can. I mean, we prefer not to tweak language, but if there's something quite compelling that you feel, or how you ask it, please feel free. I know not every project's going to do, some might need to do this as a face-to-face question with people, which does, I think, give you a little bit of room to context the question as well, if that's the way you'd be asking it. Others it will be pure survey. So it's just kind of depending on that. And I do think the point that Orla mentions is worth, it won't be one of these key questions, but when you're doing the report back, if you know you're reaching a hard to reach group, or a group that normally aren't included, I think that's really worth mentioning in your feedback about the project, because that is, that is really something that we all know is very hard to do with the project. So it's worth mentioning that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I know, our project, the idea that we're working with a group who might not want to talk about climate change because it's directly negatively affected their lives. So, or any action has affected them. So, yeah. Okay, we'll have a think about it.
There's a question there from William McElhenney. I don't know if he's on screen, but I guess what I could maybe answer it if he isn't.
Sorry.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, go ahead.
It's just that to create behavioral change, a lot of times is about engagement, and that can be in person. From the angle of stories of change, where there's a food element, the purpose of it is to engage people, especially in local foods, but also in seaweed, which has a very onerous sort of connection with people. And to get that involved, it's usually at a, on site and an active participation. If that goes online, it gets lost in translation. But I think that's something creatively we're going to have to deal with if we're going to do it. And therefore, if we have to adapt projects, which I'm sure other projects are the same, that the content and the delivery, we need to think collectively to upskill, to make it more engaging, to make a target, maybe develop a blog, or maybe develop other things around different platforms, social media or web page. I don't know what other people's thoughts are.
We might wait for, there might be some comments in the chat box back to that, William. Certainly, if your project, I know a lot of projects aren't really kicking off till the spring of next year. So obviously, this is week to week, we don't know where we're going to be in spring of next year. We might be back into more in person, or absolutely, if you feel that COVID has negatively impacted on your ability to engage, I would absolutely assume that would be part, well, we'd be talking about it as the project evolved, but yes, it would be part of your own self-evaluation at the end.
And I think maybe that's one of the things we're going to do at the end, William, is just put down topics that people would like to consider to follow up on. So I think there's been a lot of people have been forced to do stuff online. So I think collecting some learnings around that, not just in this group, I think across the various departments and organisations that are represented here. So I think it'd be really worth capturing just some easy tips, because a lot of it is just a logistic thing. Like, you need people to have an experiential element of your project. Is it a mail out? Is it hopefully it's not, hopefully it continues to be an in-person thing, but maybe it's a suggestion to the group. If you feel it's something that we could follow up afterwards with just some learnings from different people, we could do that for you. And maybe to have, I'm not sure of the timings of your project, just have a think about when is the moment where you need to decide which way you're going on it as well.
Yeah, hopefully with our project, which the rollout will be probably from February on, we can delay that. But I'm just saying to kind of have that sort of in the back of our mind that if it doesn't happen, I think there's going to be a time period to upscale that so that we can still roll out an effective program come the summer and not get caught up on, this has happened. It's to be a preemptive and to kind of direct some sort of upskilling possibly before that, in the hope that we might never need to use it.
Yeah. Thanks. Sorry, I see there's two hands up there. I'm just going to go to Sinead first, and then we do need to kind of get on with Lynch and Farga. So Sinead from...
Yeah, I just want to make one comment about the COVID thing. We've had, in our other European project, we had a whole series of events, in-person events planned for this week, and they've all been cancelled. So I would say to everyone, whether it's next February or next May or next July, do an online contingency for everything, even if you think you're sorted with the COVID, because our week was about engaging on community energy, sustainable energy communities, all about trend, and we really wanted in-person events, and now they're all gone. So be ready for it.
That's tough. Thanks, Sinead. Marianne?
Just to say that with Climate Action Week, because we had similar issues like that, one thing just from experience is we found it took a lot of time to organize the online events and to get everybody on the same page. If we had panels or we had speakers from our community groups, particularly where people were not used to using Zoom or other platforms, and people were nervous and worried that they couldn't show or didn't know how to show their presentation or share their screen and all that. So you have to build time in to actually prep everybody then. Whereas like if you just organize an in-person event, people might be nervous about public speaking, but they would just get up and talk, and you'd have your PowerPoint. So I don't know if the project, or the program rather, would consider doing some kind of a quick upskilling thing to help some of these projects, just do's and don'ts. We can certainly share tips from Dublin Climate Action Week with people through the Caro. We can probably, give you some information on our lessons learned kind of thing. But we were shocked at the learning curve that we had.
I think we've all just creativity in action, I think, has been the name of the game. And Matty Allen there has very kindly offered also to share. They put together a digital toolbox for the arts. So he's popped that into the chat box. So I think definitely coming away from this, we might collectively contact people for any toolkits they've created. I'm conscious of time, everyone, so I'm just going to move on to, I think our next speaker is from Corcaguina, is going to give a presentation. Kate will put the slides up there. Is going to give a presentation, Claire, on just how they would apply the toolkit to their in Vuanaya 2030.
Thank you, Colleen. I'm just wondering, do you want to put that into slide? Oh, brilliant. Thank you. So our project is called Corcaguina in Vuaniha, a creative imagining. And it involves an embedded artist engaging creatively with the farming community on the Dingle Peninsula. So the project has been led by the Corcaguina Hub in partnership with the Green Arts Initiative in Ireland and the Research Centre Marai, which is attached to UCC, and there's also a Marai team working on evaluation. Katrina Fallon is managing the project. Deirdre de Valise is supporting from the hub, and I'm focusing on the reflective learning and evaluation work. So the project aims to support participating farmers to identify climate action solutions that will work for them and the wider society. It comes on the back of 4 years of hard labour on the Dingle Peninsula, and it should certainly benefit from the layers of activity that have already happened in the area. So just in case people don't know what we're doing down there, I'm just going to give a tiny bit of background. So at the beginning of 2018, 4 agencies came together: the Corcaguina Hub, ESB Networks, the Northeast and West Kerry Development Partnership Group, and a small team of engaged researchers, including myself from Marai. So we set up the Corcaguina Dingle Peninsula 2030 initiative, where as partners, we actively collaborate with each other to help transition the peninsula to a low carbon sustainable future. ESB Networks is concluding its Dingle project at the end of the year, but work on the ground is developing and expanding through a number of specific projects, including this one, across the areas of energy, agriculture, marine, sustainable travel, and tourism. I know from my past experience running campaigns and community projects that evaluation is always a tricky area, as we all know. Often the important work of getting things done means there is no time left over to think, to reflect, and to question whether we are being effective. Are we achieving our aims? Or most importantly, are we recognizing and learning from any mistakes and failures? As the saying goes, it's okay to make mistakes so long as you learn from them. And we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So over the past few years, we've developed a process of reflective learning, whereby we explore different aspects of what we're doing on the peninsula, and we identify what works, what doesn't work, the benefits, the challenges, the barriers, and the lessons learned. The process is supported by the Marai team and involves qualitative questioning, workshops, and discussions. We then collate the information and collectively agree the wording and layout of a written learning brief. You'll find about 7 of these on the Dingle Peninsula 2030 and Marai websites. The most recent one outlines what we've learned over the past 4 years, and more are in the pipeline. So this reflective learning process is very useful for our work, and we're also hoping that the learning briefs will be of use to other community groups and policymakers. So this is a bit of a roundabout way of saying that we don't come into this project without some prior and, in fairness, some head-wrecking experiences around evaluation, but we're still learning, and we definitely don't have all the answers. So on slide 2 here, we have our values. So I'm just going to explain them a little bit. It's important to us that this project is co-created by the key players. Therefore, members of the coordinating committee of the West Kerry Dairy Farmers Sustainable Energy Community are very involved. For instance, they helped to shortlist and interview the applicants for the embedded artist role, and they are currently working with us to identify and select the 10 farmers who will join us on this creative journey. Similarly, participation is very important in that effective change is more likely to occur if people are actively involved. We've learned over the past 4 years that when it comes to collaborative climate action projects, flexibility is key. So if we want to take on board partners and participants' views, concerns, and ideas, if we need to respond to unexpected events, and there'll be many of these, or if we realize there's a better path, we must be able to deviate from the original plan. So empathy is the ability to understand and to share the feelings of others. This is pertinent at the moment because farmers feel got at, and many feel that they are being blamed and to some extent shamed for Ireland's carbon emissions. Therefore, understanding the issues from the point of view of the farming community is vital. And following on from this is the need for sensitivity. What we say matters. When working with communities and climate action, we all need to be open to change, both practically and mentally, particularly those of us who are steeped in the issues. We can get set in our ways and in our thinking, while at the same time expecting others to jump through the hoops. And finally, transparency is important because it helps to develop trust, both within the project and with the wider community. Openness and communication is a key part of this. So what are our goals? We want to shift attitudes and values within the farming community on the Dingle Peninsula around the role that agriculture plays in Ireland's carbon footprint. We want to support the farming community in transitioning to less carbon intensive methods, including approaches that sequester carbon and support biodiversity. And we want to create an understanding in the wider community about the challenges that farmers face, thus creating a more supportive environment in which farmers can diversify. So next slide, please. Our activities are varied, as you can see from the list here. We're currently building trusting relationships within the partnership group and also with the wider farming community. This involves regular meetings, communication, social events, and joint decision-making forums. Because we wanted to run open calls for the artist and the participating farmers, we submitted our funding proposal without either being in place. So we've recently recruited our embedded artist, Lisa Fingleton, who will be a fantastic asset to the team. And we are in the process of recruiting 10 local farmers with whom we will all work closely. Now that Lisa's in place, we will start designing a data collection and reflective learning evaluation process. This will be a flexible, co-created process, open to the twists and turns that the project and particularly the creative element will take. In January, we'll head off on the first of 8 capacity building experiential site visits, exposing the artist and the farmers to new ideas, to relevant research and innovative solutions, both within and outside of the farming sector. Lisa will then spend time on the participating farms to experience the highs and lows of farming life at the busiest times. This will help to develop relationships and to develop her creative input. There will also be other engagements and interventions as determined by the creative process. And there will be engagements with the wider community. We envisage about 3 public events and a number of creative workshops. Finally, at the end of the year, we plan to introduce Lisa and the 10 farmers to a number of key policymakers, and we look forward to seeing what emerges from that. In terms of outputs, we'll track, next slide. Thanks. In terms of outputs, we'll track how we develop trust and the co-created process by logging the relevant interactions. Because this is an embedded artist project and we need to allow the creative process to develop, the creative outputs will be defined as they emerge. The process of reflective learning and evaluation with the 10 farmers, the artist, and the coordinating team is another output, and will involve a range of methods, including exploratory workshops, surveys, interviews, and maybe some journal keeping, which will capture baseline and ongoing data and current learning. At the end of the project, we will co-produce a written learning brief, which will be disseminated online and the views will be tracked. We will also track social media metrics. And finally, a local filmmaker will record participant experiences and vox pop interviews with the general public. The online views of the video clips will be tracked. So moving on to impact. Thanks. The tricky part of evaluating a project is defining the impact you expect to have, and then stitching in ways of showing that your intervention created it. The expected impacts need to be realizable within the time frame, and this can be a challenge for a short-term project. Nevertheless, we'll give it a go. So in our case, we hope that the 10 farmers will have increased their understanding and acceptance of the need for diversification, and they will have begun to make some effective changes on their farms. This will be tracked through baseline, mid, and end of project surveys and other reflective learning interventions. The wider community on the Dingle Peninsula will have gained a better understanding of the challenges faced by the farmers, the options open to them, the supports required, and how the participants are beginning to make the transition. This will be tracked through methods such as baseline and end of project street surveys, feedback from events, comment boxes, vox pops, testimonials, and stories. We will have identified effective ways of engaging with the farming community to support them in addressing the challenges of climate change. This learning will have been shared with other communities and stakeholders nationally and will influence both policy and practice in the area. This will be tracked through testimonials from communities, stakeholders, and policymakers with whom we will have engaged, and the monitoring of policy and practice developments over time. We will have created organizational and operational change in our embedded artist, in that our embedded artist will have deepened her practice and shared learning with the artistic community. The engaged researcher, that's me, and Mari will have developed a better understanding of creative engagement practices, which will help to inform future research and engagement activities. And the Kirkagwina Hub will have developed skills and knowledge relating to creative engagement practices, which will inform future proposals and projects. These will all be tracked through personal reflections and the learning brief process. And finally, we expect that the experience and learning from this project will have influenced the development of other creative climate action initiatives across the country. And to demonstrate this, we will seek testimonials from emerging projects. So that's what we're planning. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Claire. Just in a few minutes before we take the break for lunchtime, does anybody have any questions or observations that they'd like to ask or share? Feel free to put your hands up or just jump in either.
I would just like to say thanks, Claire. It's a terrific presentation. I am conscious that we're working with you and you're already sort of 3 years in, and it's absolutely amazing that a community project has a full-time embedded researcher in UCC. That's absolutely fabulous. Whereas other people are probably starting their relationship with their academic partner. But I think you've really, really clearly kind of set out activities, outputs, impacts, and how you're tracking them. So to me, I just found that really helpful that you've taken the toolkit and kind of applied that framework to your project. So thank you.
And Tanya, can I say that it actually has been very good for us to do that? Because, you know, these sort of things, you put them off and you say, okay, we will do the outline plan and yeah, we'll do it tomorrow. You actually kind of made us sit down and work out in detail, you know, so that I think it'll be very useful for us going forward.
Great. Hopefully it sounds like budgeting at the end of the year. Claire, one thing that you mentioned that I was curious about was you said the painful process of learning what works and what doesn't work in evaluation. Could you share maybe some of those learnings with us?
I mean, maybe I'm speaking a bit personally there. I do find it hard to look at things like impact, you know, and I would have come from a lot of work in communities, and I appreciate how fast things move, you know, and I think on the Dingle Peninsula, things move very fast. So the tricky bits are trying to get us to actually stop and say, look, we need to talk about this, or I need to chase people up to get feedback from them. So that can be quite difficult. And then it's about teasing out, and we do it collectively, you know, so there is quite a bit of time spent in teasing out what actually then gets written down at the end in the learning brief, you know, so there is sometimes, at times I'm there thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to get everyone's views in here into a written sentence, you know, the way. So what I end up doing then is I might go back to one or two people who maybe have a difference of opinion on something. So I'd have a little discussion then with them, which usually irons things out. I mean, we're very good, in fairness, in our work in the Peninsula. We've learned to work very collaboratively, you know, we've very good relationships. So we'd like to continue that on into this project and the other projects we're doing. So I think actually the first thing I said, and I think it was Colleen, actually you alerted it to me, was it, or to us, that we do need to factor in the time spent in building relationships, because we've definitely had to do that in the bigger initiative on the peninsula. But it reaps benefits then when you're trying to do things like evaluation, because you actually trust each other, you know, so you can, even if you have differences of opinion, you can actually thrash out the arguments in a good natured way.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, Claire. Like, again, like, measure that, you know, if you're putting that time and effort, it's sometimes it's the invisible thing, but it makes all the difference. And Aoife, you have your hand up there.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Claire's presentation there, and that discussion there, just around that change that has taken place within Marai and within the hub. I'm sure Deirdre will echo, and the other partners, as we've been working through different initiatives over the last couple of years. I suppose we weren't initially tracking internal change, you know, and I think as well as change in the participants, it'd be really useful for the attendees to here today to think about internal change in their project and what that might mean, not only individually, but then for their organizations, if they're part of organizations. And for us, it took us a while to kind of, I suppose, click to that, and how instrumental that change can be in the longer term, because then that influences our future proposals. In our case, it actually influences our research direction or entire strategy in Marai, but in depending on the organization, it may influence their planning documents, which may include sustainability in the future or whatever that may be. So yeah, I just wanted to add that piece to Claire's point there.
And just to say, you know, for Ireland to transition, every institution is going to have to change. We individually and as collectively as communities have to change, but institutions absolutely have to change the way we do things.
And Alba Gerard, how are you?
Hi, Claire, that was really inspirational. I have to say thank you so much for sharing your experiences so far. Yeah, I'd love to discuss further with you, because we're both agricultural projects and in field Tipperary. Would it be okay to get in touch? And
brilliant. Yeah, we'll do a Zoom.
Okay, super. Thanks so much.
Great. I think it's just lunchtime now, and we're going to grab a quick. Claire, that was excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. I think there'll be plenty of people connecting with people, so that's exciting. So we're going to just take 10 minutes now for coffee break, and then we're going to come back with Renoch after the lunch break. So if people could just maybe put their Zooms on dark and mute for 10 minutes, and we'll see you all back here at 1:10. Thank you. Thanks very much. So we're back up. I know a few people will join us as we go along, but we might just stay on track with the timings. So the next person to present us is Renoch, who's going to be presenting Boinchanair, and just explaining to us how they're and again in the early stages, so they're still figuring out what they'll be evaluating and how they'll be evaluating, but she's just going to share her initial thoughts with us. So I'll hand over to you, Renoch.
Hi. Yeah. So hi. Beg mis chuireann duine an chuir lá seo an gaige agus a méle, so tásúla an chuil duine nó bertin sin a gaige. Just to say, it's mortifying to do a bilingual presentation, especially when you don't know if anybody understands the minority language. But
I think it's great that you're presenting in both, so well done.
So can you go to the next slide? So tá Boinchanair tá tóga seo lonathe ar a gathú rua sa Ghaeltacht an Ghaeltacht Chonamara agus sin aimimetá leis ná leas a bhaint tradiisiún agus lochan an na Ghaeltachta chun duling le ahrú éireide. Tá fuid an alíontóirí agus an phobal be mit gobar le chéile chun sihir alíonna a dhéanaan lectrachas as fuineh in anóte. A hógáil agus a chohaháil agus speisiú ag ré agus an fuineh á úsáid chun lesan na pobl. Agus muid á dhéanana sin bemuid tá muid cinenne i breanúir an meafar de hiarrach fuineh. So tá muid i breanúir an sean hiarrach fuineh an ír hiarrach fuineh na páirteach agus conas gur féidir an achfuine sin úsáid ar wathe leis a bobbal agus ar bháile cinál tauchaí dícharbónathe a bhaint amach atá faoi smacht an phobal áitiúil. So Baintnéir is based in an Cheathrú in the Connemara Gaeltacht. And there is a team of artists and working with the local community. So we're bar one, we're all people who, we're all artists who've lived and worked here for many years. And we are developing a cultural heritage and rights informed approach to envisaging our local post-carbon landscape. So there's a metaphor in the work of energy landscapes. We're working with two of the artists. They're going to be designing energy generating artworks that will be built and managed by the local community. They'll be up for quite a number of months, and the power will be used for communal good. And at the same time, we are investigating the local management of bogs, particularly the commonage bogs, in a way that will contribute to the decarbonisation of the local landscape. So the Halliontóirí tá Portachán Mehin agus Sean O'Flaherty. So Sean O'Flaherty from the Aran Islands is one of the artists. Aoife Casby, Aliantor, Fish Aliantor, agus Scríbhnóir agus Shicoli. So Aoife Casby, who is a multi-hyphenate artist, psychologist, writer, community activist, Coast Guard. Marcus McAneil, Fille agus Crealtor. Marcus McAneil, who is a poet, songwriter and broadcaster. Agus Paddy Bloomer, Paddy Bloomer's from Belfast, so he's the only one who's not based in the area, and he is an engineer, inventor, artist. And yeah, tá muid go le grúpi tá bunathe an hana féin ar nó Shed na Bhar, agus a chur grúpi aibre le chéile chomá. So we're working with both existing community groups, such as the local men's shed, but we're also establishing new work groups. So I think that, can I go on to the next slide, please? So so, and this one, it's kind of, I really looked at the breakdown that Creative Ireland asked in terms of the activities. So it's a little bit different looking to how I'd lay out an artist plan, but this is kind of what we're doing. So that like element practical der bunnagan, fólam le chéile, be mi de tógáil le chéile, so be mi dan gníomhúil an is tóga an practical der fadata an maidir snubberhíonn sa dhéanamh ag a bubble. Agus tríd sin an sin be mi de súile cinna na principal banistú áitiúla a haingtamach agus a éantú le chéile. So there is kind of, it's very much practice-based learning. So we've got practice-based learning on renewable energy generation and energy consumption in preparation for the design and community build and maintenance of these renewable energy generating artworks. So the learning kind of is quite organic coming from it. It's like, what do we need to know in order to do this? How can you generate power? How much and for what purpose and for who? And then beg mit a mo chud is módan am maidir le fólam faoin tíorach áitiúil ecóíoch na háite a chóirú páirteag cad é tá fós fáca goin maidir le leis an chóthaíoil agus cad go féidir dhéanamh le Lenny and Artu. So we're working with including paleoarchaeologist Ben Geary and forensic ecologist Rosie Everett on peatland ecology. We're going to be learning about the local environment, local biodiversity, what has been lost, what can be strengthened, what is the potential of what is mostly peatland and degraded bog in local ownership, and what is the potential of those landscapes for local, for going towards a decarbonised Ceathrú. Agus an sin le chéile as an obergeléir sin be mid ag tarint chéile plan gníomhaíochtaí de hiarach fuineh glas atá bunathe ceartí agus principal áireachta de gníomhú éráide. So really techt an phobal in níos cad é chunas go féidir an pobl gníomhú son phobal. Agus be reinintfáda sin na feicáil in dógraí ealaína le Marcus agus le Aoife, ba chomáile sin na sconán fáisnéise atá stúra gom héin agus Jolie. So is cinál in sa sconán so be méid cinál ben na principal an beg dearcha an tóga go léir. So is slíháin is meastachán atá sa sconán agus an tólas atá crunethe again agus aontathe again a riint le pobl níos mó. So through this kind of work, we will be developing with, with the participants, their vision of an action plan for a landscape of green energy. So and Chiafrua being zero carbon. So what would that be like? Not just look like, but how would it work? What would they do? How can they imagine their locality in 20 years? And in this, we are kind of pulling out with people, what are the values, what are the principles that are important for this future? It's an area of, there's a high level of tension about what actions are happening in terms of climate change in the area. It's very much seen that it's top-down imposed policies that are not to the benefit of the local community. There's active engagement against the wind farms that are seen to be external, completely external, and that the benefits from that are external as well. And everybody articulates how concerned they are the loss of access to their own natural resources, and that it would be better managed from the ground up. And all of this then will be documented in a film by myself and Jolie. So the film is both one of the artworks and actually kind of an evaluation. It feels very strongly that if we're seeking information from people, that information is then returned back to them as quickly and as precisely as possible, so that we are just interpreting their voices, their needs, and then amplifying it. And then big show to an spoke the realta amofinair again. We'll make sure that there's going to be celebrations as well, because there's going to be a lot of hard work. So we'll have a launch of the artworks and we'll have closing events as well. And can I have the next slide, please? So outputs, what we're measuring. So the Kera Kinal stáid lei seo, tá muid an sa stáid taide agus I suppose an pobl a haingta chéile faoi láthair. Agus an sin stáid Cairlinn agus fálam, agus an sin tógáil, agus an sin beg stáid cohála an ar bhíon na tógaí ealaí na hús, agus a gobar, agus go bheichhí iad a gobar, agus tá muid súla ag leh sin ar bhíonn siad chó feicálaach gur bin an go méid an chud is mód an chóra sa phobal a tarlú. So we'll be at the which we're in the research stage, but really I should have called that the research and activation stage, because it's all happening kind of below the surface of the water now, but there's lots and lots and lots of meetings, lots of individual meetings been happening for the past few months to kind of really get everybody on board with this. So we'll be measuring Tinrav participation. How often do are there repeats, is as an indication of the depth of engagement with it, and then also what kind of participation. So called the Yanan Slini and KV to Huggenshed. So we're kind of how much do the participants give and influence and change what the project is going to be. So that's the kind of numbers that we're looking for the 4 stages of research: the workshopping, learning stage, the build stage, which is going to be great fun. And then when the artworks are up, they'll be up for a few months till the in operation, and they'll have to be maintained. So we imagine that that's a time when there's going to be a lot of public discussion by people who aren't necessarily active participants, but this will be the local community seeing these things up and getting curious and getting in. So we've a lot of stuff there to then catch people and go, okay, now you've seen this, you've seen what about energy, what else can we do? There's other numbers that we're looking for is, you know, the kind of the network of all the different involved parties. So what's that kind of web of local parties that are involved in this? The Údarás na Gaeltacht is involved already, and just from an individual to an organizational level, how many in the local area do we catch? Céhbhíonn Brown were in the loch and the see here alina clickers and sin, like who actually just looks at them and interacts with them. I don't know exactly what kind of interaction until we know what design it is. And then Céhbh ag cur an onchar nalini is the principal access gunline. So who contributes to the principles and to the film, what do they contribute, the depth of contribution. Agus and obviously loch fechana, mean socialta, agus currichan kainte. So film audience numbers, social media, and then kind of a secondary the way of measuring is like a measurement of interest will be the invitations to present about the work. So that's kind of already started. So hopefully that'll spread out more. Agus in the next one, so I have 2 slides on this one. I was more interested in the direct impacts than indirect. Just maidile me meastóireacht is gom go seo in the príomhcheiste tá an maidile cího éfachtúil is a bhí an tógra bhfuil daoine méid daoine a gníomhú nó má tá sibh luach an gníomhú go dogus siad gealtanas maidile a úsáid fuineh iad hain level 1. And me siad glacaport dógraí giniúint fuineh beidir go gur siad tuile go meach spéisiú i Willian glíthe nó lehead nó éonrad níos mó fuineh inanúte i dhéanaine sa cheantar, laidú úsáid móna mar bhrósla, spéis agus gealtanas maidide le bainistí inmhúnathe in the pártaigh atá i gcaimín go coitianta, agus go méid daoine gníomhúch an coscachuir an tinte pártaigh, agus go maithan daoine grada tar scile na methleibre a ólam agus a chuir so knowing that, you know, like a year is an incredibly short time frame, so I'd love it, you know, we're aiming to look for actions that people actually take action, but it could be that more likely that it'll be that people will commit to starting action. So around their own individual and group level energy consumption, that there's commitment to reduce it, a commitment to increase renewable energy generation, to reduce the use of peat as a fuel, which can only happen if there's a viable alternative given. And there's a significant amount of fuel poverty in the area, hasn't recovered since the beginning of the recession. 2011, up to 2011, there was a decrease in the use of peat as a fuel, and then with massive job losses that increased, and it's still at a high level. That people will engage actively in a sustainable management of local bogs, and also engage in reducing the incidence of fires and commonages, because of what they'll have learned, because that now we need to re-wet them, otherwise they're a massive risk in a drying climate. And also that people would have acknowledge that there was a learning of measurable skills in cooperative community builds that they could use again. Next one. So cinál seamastóir oscailte dom gneanam muid an seo faoi cinál an tunchar neamhíoch beidir go bheith like go bheithtar go ghlachan pobl leis na saothar alína, gur cheapad a gur chuidir leis an áit agus go raibh spéisiú. Gur léirigh go ghlachdaoine gur léirigh an tóg measar aireacht agus cultúr na háite. Go bhrád daoine go raibh siad cumasaach an gníomhúir san na híráide mar thura ar dógra. Gur neartig an tógra spirit a fábal. Go raibh go bhrádaoine go raibh kind of méadú ar go méidir sin ná féinmhíor a dhéanamh maidir le finna bhíhinúint, agus go bhrádaoine níos mó córágracht, bheagracht agus córágracht faoi úsáid fuineh, agus go bhrádaoine go raibh níos mó freagrachtach agus smachtach ar chunas na páirtaigh áitiúla a bhainistú meach atá inmhúnathe. So this is going to be open-ended evaluation, kind of open questions, but mining for what people felt about the actual project, the renewable energy artworks. Were they received positively, or were they considered negatively? Whether people felt that the local cultural heritage and values, and obviously language, were respected and strengthened through the project, whether they felt empowered to act, whether they felt that acting together on the climate change project strengthened community ties, whether they felt more autonomy as prosumers. Because again, if we go back to the turf heritage here, that was a heritage. It is a heritage of energy and fuel independence and fuel producing it for yourself, and that psychologically is a massive thing that has been lost and hasn't been recognized. So whether this project in a way gives another avenue for energy independence. Next one, nearly there. Oh God, okay. So this is kind of the wish list. I know you're okay. Go back. So this is the wish list of what's kind of pushing me along in particular with this project. The measure of success would be that there be increased engagement with sustainable energy plans and projects in the locality, whether that's initiating new ones or more active involvement in there's a small SEC plan. Success would be more community climate actions, and that's starting from a pretty low level. Success would be actions around the locally owned bogs that would result in sustainable management and restoration of them. So so Sinead agus cad go dtíorcha bheith an sin na feiscint. Okay, tunchar last one. So tá na bunlínte kind of cóhain mu inis agus tá mu dul dro an ceann san sean an dhearnach chunastá cuasaí faoi láthair mar an bhunlíne. So cad é líon ru go leiscéil, na ngúpaí áitiúlatá gníomhú ar san na hÉráide. Cén staidetá ar na Pórtaigh faoi láthair. Cén sort foiineh catá dhéanamh maidide le a giniúint foiineh in an nóta sa cheantar ó meon go mór scála, agus cén level ran fortíocht tá an iscéimena sa cheantar. So kind of a baseline mapping. If we're aiming for that last slide, then where is it right now? So this is obviously will add to it, but ones that we're mapping out is like, what are the climate action projects and groups in the area? While there is Údarás na Gaeltacht that has the Gaeltacht Glass aim and is actively working, has an active climate action policy. There isn't a per se environmental group in the area. There isn't a biodiversity group or anything like that. So it's kind of community level, quite low level group participation, while there's some on an individual level. The state of the bogs in the area, and again on a national level, there hasn't been enough done about actually mapping what the condition of the bogs and the wetlands in the area. So mapping where they are and what condition they are. And already then you're kind of getting into the position of like the problem about being between two stools when mostly it's a commonage area. And what are the renewable energy generation projects that are happening now, either on a individual basis, like in household, up to the medium and large scale. And there are some very this project, the local Corchaman has a solar farm on its roof, and it's going to be expanding that. And Údarás na Gaeltachta is moving in that area as well with a feasibility study. But then on the individual, what's happening on household level and smaller scale microgeneration is very, very low. So we're going to be surveying, and how to survey is a big challenge because da nóid tá mórcha daoine nachfuil an spéisiúcha bud éigean digiteach agus na ní heasans bhfuil í scríomh. So in terms of surveying, we're using a lot of different methodologies because seriously, nobody wants to do a survey. Nobody is interested. They all want to kind of get out, get your hands dirty, do stuff. but don't want to actually do a survey. So we're going to be using a lot of different ways of including that in. And then to get a more in-depth information, it would be to do case studies. So an individual household energy audit at the beginning of this project and at the end, and a case study of a local community, Conaminish bog. And there's a lot of movement in that direction in terms of having a bog to play in. So Sinead? Yeah.
Rinach sin an a simúil agus níl lantám mar ceisteach ach I'll have to turn to English because I'm not as talented as yourself, but I think there's a couple of things that are very interesting there. I think that sense of control is really interesting, and the psychological thing that you mentioned. You also mentioned that somebody on your team has a psychology background. So I think it'd be really interesting if there's a way to kind of look at any, I don't know, psychological measures, but I just think it'd be very interesting to see. And empowerment in this project has an entirely different meaning, because they've gone from owning their own bit of bog to not owning their bit of bog. So there's something quite interesting there. I know we're under a little bit of time, but in fairness to Rinach, she had to present in 2 languages. So I think we should give her 5 minutes. Does anybody have any questions or observations that they'd like to make there? Zoe, hi.
Hiya. Thank you for your talk. I was actually curious about the different surveying methods you have, and like I'm going to present on our project in a minute, and you'll kind of see where this could kind of feed in. But like I have a science background, and when I initially thought about surveying people, I thought of just using a clipboard where people came to installations, surveying them. From the last Creative Island workshop, I realized that kind of comes at a level of like intimidation. It's kind of off-putting. Do you have other methods that you would suggest of how to survey, something that's kind of more simple and creative, less intimidating, perhaps?
So I'm a geographer by trade. So we've geography, psychology, broadcasters, interviewers, and documentary filmmakers. So we're using everything. We're going to use, obviously, the very simple phone-based Google Doc. That's straightforward. That gets one person. That's, I think, handy for the shorter yes, no kind of answer. A lot of the people are either older, and again, this comes from just having worked in the area for like 20 odd years. So I'm going to be interviewing, sitting down and having the chats, and then it's up to me to record that. What I tend to do is I record the person back, I write it down, and then I give them back what I understood their answers to be. And I go, is this it? So it's incredibly labor intensive. It's incredible, but it is much more accurate. And then I think the film itself, the way myself and Joe work as well, is a very useful way to, again, it's kind of more on the attitudes, the motivation, what's empowering you, how do you feel about this? That's, because that's interviews, that will be somebody speaking. And again, what we do is when we interview people, we'll record them and everything, but we always show back to them before we release. So, we edit them, blah, 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 but there's about, there's usually 3 to 4 interviews for every interview, so that what we can be sure is that what we are getting is what that person wants to say. Yeah. Then the other thing that we're doing is we're sticking up a big a notice board at the local shop. So we can be pretty sure that everybody in Chiatarua goes to the shop at least twice a day. And so there's a notice board where you can, with the map of Chiatarua, where you can stick up your ideas about, we can tell people about what's happening, but also then it's a place where people can, Braccia say, just jot down. And I did talk to Ripple as well, so hopefully Ripple doesn't mind me saying that I think I'm going to be having a voice recorder on it as well, so that people don't have to write, because Irish is not an easy language to write. It's like German, it's easy to speak, but it's absolutely to write. So we're going to have like a button as well.
I think the point that you make that nobody else has raised, which I think is really important, is about sharing the evaluation in as close to real time with the people who participated, is a really key point as well. Mairead from Mairead Keshtagat as Ripple. or rising tides. Sorry, Marie, that's rising tides.
Yeah.
Rising. Sorry.
Yeah. So Tom McDonough evaluation le rising. Colossian na Trinaja och Tom Mahoney counter shock in Indravon. So just hi. Just like Dortun nachwil more on group agnivu or son na hiraja ach Kirtwin na groupie atá Jurikanaya, na ahruhe. So tá group an seo Ganaya na Willian Guiha.
Yeah, but there's the night na Willian Guiha ach ní the night agnivu na hiraja tá the night and slí kahachlu. So we as beter gref to a grinu and Luin Shakata, but Shindini vech ansasta le agnivu in the hiraja ach ní in slí shin. So shin like top down planning shin a go mude déile na 5 in the week sin cos ma jouler sin tá daoine an drug tá bín drug le daoine bheith pórtach an éad eile. So we live beside the Coney Arms in Indravon, so can we go in chéile?
Yeah.
So we just made a connection.
Beidir ceist eile, so beidir nach ní an grúpa sin ach ceirt bhí daoine atá like tá mion déanta suas agus ní níl me sásta le bheith ahrú
Yeah, Kinsa cogur an slí ceanna leis an feachtas vaccine. No seach fin géad de éan tá vaccine ghlacha a trí fin géad nach tá dú tú. Má chuinte de chuid funneh goléir seach a trí fin géad caiilen tú nó secht. So sin mórrod san ná glachan forward is na daoine le leis so ní me bacaló fiúháin tu siad lo. So Maria asked a really relevant question about what about the climate deniers, the people who don't want to act, and there is and I think here Maria might be aware, might be getting that same thing as well, is that there is a reluctance to act because people. One of the reports back to me, people are afraid to sacrifice something if their neighbor isn't. So around here, there is a huge distrust of government because they've seen livelihoods like in fishing. There was fishing, now there isn't. So what else are we being asked to sacrifice for who? So my focus on this one is the same as like with the vaccine program. We've got 97% vaccinated, 3% who are anti-vax. Are you going to give your energy to them? Or are you going to give your energy to the majority? So I'm really focusing on positive things in this one. Like I've done climate change projects, which have been about scaring the pants off people. Got that out of my system, and now it's on to utopia. We're playing with utopia in this one. Little homegrown utopias, and hopefully that will give people a little bit more courage. But we are more that I will be interviewing people who think that this is stupid. I want their voices.
Thanks, Reenach. And so interesting. Thank you so much. As Tanya pointed out, please feel free to contact each other directly on some of these topics. We'll be going for the utopia notion for this, but I think that sounds fantastic, and thank you for such a thorough look at the evaluation technique. We're going to move on finally to Lynch and Farraga. Zoe, I think you're going to be presenting to us now about just how you're going to evaluate, which again is another completely different approach to a project, so interested to see your approach and how you're going to challenge it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'd say that one of the big differences about our project, which I think will kind of be clear as I go through, is that we've started with the kind of science science team and our art team initially, and then we are kind of identifying locations where to install our light installations, and then we'll be working with the local community. So I think we can learn a lot here from the other groups. My name is Zoe Roseby. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Trinity College Dublin. I work on reconstructing sea level rise. I'm working with a collaborative team, including artists Timo Aho and Pekka Mitrovica, scientists at Maynooth University. We're working with the Dublin Climate Action Regional Office and Algorithm and Native Events to produce these light installations that will be across Irish coastal locations and heritage sites. Could I have the next slide, please? So this is just kind of a bit of a background about the project, and you can see here an image which is a mock-up of what one of these installations could potentially look like. This was produced by Pekka. So the aim of Lynch and Farraga is to connect the public tangibly to the risks from sea level rise and storm surges. using light installations across Irish coastal locations and heritage sites. The lights are LED lines, they're not projected, so there'll be a physical light strip wrapped around these features. Alongside the lights, there'll be interactive educational resources. The heights of the lines are going to be founded on predictions of future sea level rise from international benchmarks. So we'll be leaning on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, AR6, which has predictions for 2100, 2150, 2300, and also bringing in historic storm surges so that people can really see the impact of these kind of sea level rise and storm surges together, especially given that storm surges will likely become more frequent in the future. We want to demonstrate that the future is still in our hands, so we'll be showing a high greenhouse gas emissions scenario, but then using our educational resources to show, the line doesn't have to reach this high, but we can kind of work together collectively as a society to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and lower the lines. That'll be a message that will be feeding through all our social media and public outreach events. Can I have the next slide, please? So these are our kind of key goals. The first is to raise awareness of the impacts of future sea level change and risks from storm surges in Ireland to inspire a more sustainable and resilient future. And it's interesting because I think that and we heard this from the last meeting, that the Irish public are very much aware of climate change in general. What's interesting from past studies about sea level change, and there was a really interesting one published this year based from the public in New Zealand, that people don't always understand the causes of sea level change, and they also tend to misjudge the risks of future sea level rise. So kind of they might under or overestimate what future sea level rise might look like in the future. So there's definitely some opportunity there for more awareness raising and education. And then the other aspect, which is kind of our behavioural change piece, is to mobilise community-led climate action, mitigation, and also adaptation. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so these are a list of kind of the activities that we're planning. So the first is these light installations. We're aiming for 3 locations. And again, you can see an example here. I should say that these mock-ups don't necessarily show the exact location, but they are kind of an artistic vision. At each of our sites, we'll have information boards, which will tell people about what the lines represent, with some of the science information there. And also QR codes that will link people to our website that we're developing in collaboration with Algorithm. And I'll discuss the website a bit more on the future slide, because I think this is really where most of our kind of education campaign kind of comes in. We're using Twitter, Instagram, and hopefully TikTok to do our social media. And we already have these accounts set up. So like I would like to ask and invite people to follow us, and we're kind of already putting up content on those sites. We're going to have a launch evening for each one of the openings, and we will invite members of the public. And I mean, it's an outdoor event, so I hope that these will go ahead. But kind of going back to what we were discussing earlier, we will have we'll have to consider like the situation with COVID, sort of when that happens. And we're working with the communications teams at Trinity College Dublin and also with Creative Ireland to think about media engagement and how we can really spread the word of this project next year. And then there'll be some kind of site-specific activities. So this could involve having panel discussion meetings with the team. I think that we have a really great team and varied team of scientists and artists and members of local authorities involved, that we can have these kind of discussion seminars with the local communities. So we could do this in person. So once we've chosen our sites, we could kind of work with the local authorities to use kind of a public venue to do a discussion evening, or this could kind of easily be transferred to being on like a Zoom setting. And sort of other site-specific activities other than the launch evenings might be kind of surveying as well, which I will talk about in the outputs. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so our first output would be that we would have public engagement with the light installations and attendance at launch events. So in order to measure this, we could use ticket registration, and this was already mentioned before, but the actual idea kind of I saw was kind of used for the Rising project was that you have free tickets, but they are distributed through Eventbrite, and that would be a good way of measuring how many people are interested in attending. And we've kind of been considering some benchmarks of what we'd consider to be kind of an achievement in this aspect. From discussion with the previous project, it would be good for us to have approximately 600 people across all of the sites attending the installation launches. And I guess this will vary depending on the eventual chosen locations and what kind of capacity that we have. But that would be kind of a good turnout for us. And then we can assess how many people actually attend based on using clickers on the kind of launch evenings. But after the installations have been launched, they're going to be left in place for weeks to months, depending on our final arrangements with each area. And so then we won't be able to really count the number of people that are visiting at any one time. Although these are mainly in places they're going to be in places of high visibility, so we will be able to assume that people are seeing them as they're kind of walking past them on a daily basis or while they're on holiday. But the other thing we can use is our website. So as I said, we're going to have these information boards with QR codes, and people will be able to access our website through those. So we can see how many people are not only seeing them, but are actually interested in learning more and kind of going onto our website to do that. So kind of also on the website side, we can use Google Analytics. We're planning on working with algorithm to be able to assess the number of visitors onto our website, how much time is spent on our website, and depth into website reached. So kind of how far into the content they travelled. And where they visited the site from. So are they coming from the installation locations themselves, coming from the QR codes, or are they coming from, say, like a social media link? Could I have the next slide, please? I just wanted to kind of run through the kind of website aspect of our project, because as I said, this is where most of our kind of behavioural change information could be hosted. So our kind of the sort of plan for our website is that you come onto a landing page and you choose one of the Lynch and Farragut installation locations. You observe the installation itself as kind of a mock-up sketch and where that line sits, which will match the installation height. We want people to be able to kind of scroll down through the website and observe how reducing their greenhouse gas emissions can lower the line. So as I said before, we're likely going to be putting these light installations at a point that represents quite a high-end greenhouse gas emission scenario. But we want to show people that by kind of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that it doesn't have to be as bad as what we're representing. This is where we can kind of then bring in climate action. So we've been working with Hannah Daly at UCC to identify the main contributors of our greenhouse gas emissions in Ireland and also our targets for the future. So one thing that we could do is to suggest societal actions in each kind of one of these key contributing areas. So whether that is transport or the home or residential or power generation, these don't have to be kind of individual actions, but also things that would be kind of like societal actions that we really need to be participating in to reach these targets. So we're working with Hannah to kind of build that section of the website. And this should say adaptation, the other important, not only kind of mitigating against climate change, but also appreciating that, we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, but there will still be sea level rise in the future, and that we can adapt so that we don't have to kind of suffer the worst consequences of that sea level rise. And adaptation is a tricky subject because often people think of like hard defences, that would be like sea walls or barriers to kind of reduce wave action. But it doesn't have to be hard defences, it can also be soft defences, but these things are going to be necessary to think about in the future as we move towards kind of defending our coastal businesses, coastal homes, coastal environments. And so we can promote people to support their local authorities' efforts or promote their local authorities' efforts to adapt against sea level rise. And then I should say that what we want to have at the end of the website is kind of a call to action. So, people will be visiting our sites, they'll be on the website, they'll scan the QR code. We don't want them to kind of read this and then walk away. Like a simple thing that we could do kind of on the call to action side would be to ask them to follow our social media, because then we can keep advertising and speaking to that same group of those people kind of again and again. Yeah, that's, can I have the next slide, please? We've been using social media, and if this is going to be, we'll be using our social media a lot because this project is so visual. We're going to have photographs and drone footage of each of the installation sites that we'll be sharing on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And we'll be able to measure the output in terms of the number of followers, profile visits, impressions, mentions, and views. And we're trying to give ourselves some benchmarks that we can really aim to be promoting followers onto our accounts. So, for example, with Twitter, we set ourselves some targets to have 100 followers by the end of November, 200 by the end of January, 400 to 500 by the end of the project. And we're doing quite well already in terms of the number of people that are visiting our page. And we hope that that will only increase once we've kind of got this original content in terms of the images and drone footage. And then we've got the participation in talks or panel events. As I said, these could be in person, but they could also be easily put on online. From speaking to other projects, including the Carrows and from their Climate Action Week, I think approximately 50 attendees at a Zoom meeting would be considered a good turnout. And we can speak to local authorities next year and kind of see where things are, what the situation is like to be having this kind of in-person versus online panel event. Can I have the next slide, please? And then this is kind of where we can sort of really start to understand the impact is from the surveys and questionnaires. And this links to the question that I just had about the previous project, is that we want to find ways of surveying people. And I think we've got two places that we can do that. We can do that on our website, and we can do that linked to the launch evenings. So the website, I think once people have kind of gone through this kind of storyline of like, this is a high-end scenario, these are the actions that we could do to adapt and mitigate. And then we can ask them some questions about how they feel at the end of that kind of journey. And I think this could be a good place to slot in these creative island questions, which we could, I mean, we've just had a conversation about this, so maybe they won't be tweaked, but I was wondering whether, so for our project, whether it would be like, I feel differently about sea level rise and storm surges versus climate change, but there also could be both those questions. It doesn't have to be kind of, yeah, we can have a chat about that and see. So those questions could focus on climate change adaptation and mitigation. And then we also have an opportunity to like speak to people in person during the launch evenings. And again, this is when we're trying to think of ways of surveying people rather than just like shoving a clipboard into their faces. We can survey people in a way that'd be simple, interactive and comfortable. So for example, that could be having notes for people to write and put into a post box. It could be obviously weather dependent, but like people writing their thoughts or feelings and pinning them onto boards so that other people could read them. I think that there are some creative ways that we could get people's feelings about our project on site. And on this kind of benchmarking side, I think one of the places that this would kind of be a future action and I think a future consideration for our project is baseline mapping. How do people already understand sea level rise and storm surges, and how can we understand that our project is to kind of change those feelings? So I think once we've identified our site, I mean, we could do this from pre-existing studies. As I say, there have already been some countries that have carried out these kinds of studies. So we can kind of compare the population of Ireland compared to those other populations after this project. But it would be kind of more powerful to maybe work with some focus groups in each community to survey how they feel about these about sea level change and storm surges and what the main drivers are of sea level change and whether they over or underestimate it in the future. That would be something to consider working with focus groups in each local authority. So I think that will be a really interesting next step for us on our evaluation side. And I think I've got one last slide on our impact. So I just wanted to link back to our goals and say that, you know, what we're hoping for is to meet these goals and have an impact related to them. So we want to raise awareness of the impacts of future sea level change and storm surges. And so that's what we want to see in our audience. And I think that we could do this through, we can see how many people we've reached and kind of shared this message through the number of site and website visitors, and also from our survey results, and linking back to this kind of future consideration benchmarking. We also wanted to mobilise community-led climate action and adaptation. And we, like I say, we have a website and tools to encourage people to participate in climate action. And it'd also be interesting to accept and promote adaptation efforts. And this kind of like a sort of spark from one of the earlier talks was whether that might be something that we could have kind of testimonials from the local authorities to see whether this might be a long-term change, but whether they're finding that their local area is more likely to promote and accept adaptation efforts. So yeah, that's where we are at the moment, and yeah, I'd appreciate any comments or questions. So thank you. Oh, Colleen, you're on mute. I can see you talking.
Sorry, I thought I'd take myself off. I'm just wondering if anybody wants to ask any questions or has any observations on the project that they'd like to do.
Yeah, I have a question here from Tanya about the 3 counties. We're like very close to narrowing them down, but I don't want to promise anything yet. But we'll let you know as soon as we have. We had the artists over in Ireland last weekend, so they've now seen all of the sites and they're currently drawing up sketches. They're going to share those with the local authorities. There's a lot of factors that we're taking into account, including like kind of like the heritage status of buildings, how well visited they are, how easily they can host solar panels and the such. So it's been quite a process, but I'd say that we're a couple of weeks off choosing them. So yeah, we'll obviously let the Creative Island team know, but we'll also work with local authorities to kind of announce those locations and hopefully get a bit of positive response from the local communities that way.
And Zoe, when you have the press release about which locations, could you put them in the SharePoint folder, which Kate and Emco is going to just put the link there again for everybody, because I'm just thinking about other projects around the country that might love to know, oh, you're coming to Galway, I'm based in Galway. Do you know what I mean? It's both the links with the other projects. If you're coming to town, I think it would be great for them to know.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. And we'll also put, I saw something as well about, we'll put our website and social media links in there as well.
Thanks. Just the question I had, Zoe, there was 2 questions just from what you had. Why did you choose TikTok? Was just one question. Like, did your social media profile, does that relate to who you're wanting to target?
Yeah, I think, well, it's because this project is so visual, and I mean, it's a bit intimidating for our group because none of us have ever used it before. But it's a different demographic. I think that these projects weren't designed to target children, but I'd say that like teens are definitely moving that way. I think that Instagram has unfortunately become like a bit, it's not behind, but you know what I mean? Like we want to target a different group of people, and I think our project really leans into that because we can have drone footage and videos. It might be that we don't have like loads of content on there, but it might just bring in and highlight to a different group of people that our project exists and kind of pull them into our website that way. Yeah, just kind of trying to get more reach really. But yeah, we're still kind of experimenting with how that might work. And
Zoe, can I just ask, because I'm conscious we have Darnie on the call and you have your own hashtag, which is, I think, something the line?
Yeah, we're going with lower the line. Lower the line.
Just can people tag Creative Ireland? Because obviously we have a little listening tool. So if somebody tags us, we'll reshare and repost. We have a common hashtag, which is just Creative Climate Action. And again, we're listening to any conversations happening in social about that, and then we pop in your projects. So it's not to take away from your own hashtags or accounts, but just please do tag us, and if you can use the same hashtag, and then we'll start to, we want to kind of amplify whatever you're doing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we've been tagging, but I'm not sure about their hashtag, so I'll check that we're doing that. Cool.
Thanks. And Zoe, the other question I had from your approach that was interesting for others to learn from was your benchmarking. So I think on the social media or just on events, to sort of, who did you speak to decide on what your benchmarks were?
So we just tried to identify projects. So in terms of the talks, we spoke to we didn't really speak, we spoke to David Dodds from the Climate Action Regional Office. He's involved in our project, and their Climate Action Week we felt like was a good project to benchmark our talk participation with. And then I spoke to Rising about how they had, how people had responded to their installation evenings, because I felt like that we might attract a similar audience. I mean, one of the things probably their project was in city centre Dublin, there's a large population to advertise and pull, so that probably needs to be taken into consideration, but that was really where we got these an idea of the numbers of how much interest we'd get from. On the social media side, we're struggling to find projects which were like kind of just off the ground like ours, so we just tried to make, based on kind of the response that we've been getting so far, kind of what would be seen like a good result. and that was a bit harder to get a benchmark of.
Yeah, but it's just kind of to give yourself something to aim towards. I think.
I think so. Yeah, it's good to feel like you can kind of, especially with the social media, you can start promoting things more, sharing things more, putting up more content, and trying to reach those targets helps.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Zoe. I'm just actually, there was a question earlier from Marilyn for Claire, and I think it was before she had to leave, and she was asking about, sorry, I'm just going to go back to it. It was asking about the number of projects that you think, or sorry, where was it? Like, pull it out. It was about the number of participants that you think is ideal to kind of include in a project.
Yeah. I think she was also linking into the learning briefs, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, I read something years ago that the ideal group for a focus group is, the ideal number is 10. And I must admit that kind of works. So as it happens, our collaborative coordinating committee on the Dingle project has roughly 10 people. So some of the learning briefs have been with that group of 10. Others have been more focused on specific projects. So it's been the people who are involved in those projects. So it could have been 2 or 3 people. But I think also when we're online, 10 people is probably okay, you know, but anything above that I think is a bit unwieldy as well.
Unless you're going into breakout groups and having a lot of coordination, it's very hard for people to speak. Yeah. Brilliant, thanks Claire. So if anybody else has any other questions that they'd like to share, we've kind of allowed time now just for kind of discussions, thoughts, any queries. Obviously people can contact other people individually as well. And one thing that we just kind of discussed in preparation for this today was interesting ways to make sure that the artist's voice is heard in this process as well. So just, and you know, is represented as part of the learning as well. So I'm just wondering, had people already started thinking about how they'd involve the artist's voice or other sort of non-targeted audiences who'd be part of the project, how you're going to include their learnings?
I might also ask, is Sean from the Bohemian Football Club on this call as well? Might ask people just to turn on their cameras. Sure. It would appear not. Well, in that case, what I might do, Colleen, is just I'll pop the Bohemians detail, because obviously their project.
Sorry, just to interrupt, Tanya. He's literally just arrived.
Great. Sorry to put you on the spot, but everybody else had an opportunity at the first workshop to give just a little description of their project. So I have your film link, but you might want to just say a few words about the Bohemian Way.
Hi, Sean. I've just let you in there. Don't know if you caught that. There. He's not.
He's not. Okay.
Do you want to just give a bit of context in case he does come into the room there, Tanya?
Yeah, sorry. You're saying he's sort of joining the meeting room now?
He's here, but he might just be having trouble connecting. I can see him there. But...
there he is.
There he is. We are talking about you, Sean.
Hi, Sean. You're very welcome. You might just give a little introduction to the Bohemians Way project. Everybody else at the first webinar had a chance to present so that we all understand what everybody else is doing. Over to you.
Thank you, Tanya, and sorry I had to step out there. I was on a panel. The Bohemian Way, we're delighted to be partnering with Creative Ireland on this project, because for Bows, you know, our community is very important to us. Our sense of community, our sense of place is very important. And that sense, that place has moved. So the club was founded in the North Circular Road cottage in the Phoenix Park. And that is going to be the starting point of the Bohemian Way. It's going to be a walkway that tries to weave 3 stories together: the story of the history of the club, the story of the history of the communities around that club, and the story of transition. So how do we move from where we are now to a safer and fairer future through the climate crisis? In doing that, it gives us an opportunity to work with a variety of brilliant local artists to tell stories of change, to changes that occurred in the past, changes that occurred within our communities in the past, and the change that's coming. And it also gives us the opportunity to bring communities together to discuss the change. And that's going to be particularly exciting. So whether that's through, exhibitions or poetry recitals or gigs, or just historical conversations, everything that enables us to bring people together for a conversation will also enable us to talk about the climate transition and the future that we face as a group. Some of I was listening in earlier on in terms of the presentations on evaluation, and I think ours will be very much focused on that empowerment aspect, bringing the communities along the Bohemian Way together to talk about their own agency in creating change, their own ability to engage in both climate action, but also in the debates around inclusion and participation and the idea of a just transition. We're hoping we will be able to, over the journey, create a significant number of new poems, new songs, new artistic pieces, and we will have a lot of fun doing it, I think, and that's going to be the main aim, is to get the community excited, energized, and involved. So I don't know, Tanya, if that's all right, or if you want more.
No, that's really helpful, Sean, and I've put the lovely film by your spoken word poet, which we just loved. You might just, before we go for other questions, could you just give everybody a line or two about the People's Transition, the People's Project in Phibsborough? There are a lot of people on this call doing community-based projects. You've spent 7 months just with the people in Phibsborough on a community engagement project. Could you tell us when that report is coming out and your experience of that community engagement project?
Yes, certainly. The report will hopefully be out in the next week or so. We're just we're going back and forth with the designer on it currently. The People's Transition is a model that we developed in Task. Task is an independent think tank based in Dublin, and we're looking at the challenge of transition through the lens of how back to that idea of empowerment. How do we expand the capabilities of the communities that have to go through this transition, such that they see their standards of living increase, and then the appetite for transition becomes greater. The problem we face at the minute is so many people are fearful that elements of climate action will make their lives harder. What we want to do is change that, turn the tables on that, and try to design a participative model that really lets people see themselves in the future with a greater stake in their societies. So it's based on a concept called community wealth building, which some of you may know. In fact, I think the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, CLES, are now working with Dublin City Council on elements of local wealth building around a new development plan. But the idea is that you keep money that is being spent within local communities, such that you kind of rise all boats. And climate action is a really good opportunity for that, because in fact, the investment in climate action global in Ireland will be the biggest ever stimulus package this country has ever seen, right? If we're to do it right. And if we spend that through communities, empowering communities and letting communities actually own the assets of change, we'll see quite radical transformation. So in Phibsborough, we've been working with the community to map who's in the community. That's a very key point for us. We didn't go in and talk to the community in the first instance. We just started looking at data that existed. So anywhere we could find census data or anything else, to understand just who is in the community, because there's often a lot of hidden poverty, a lot of voices that don't get heard in typical participation processes. And we wanted to reach those voices first. So that informed then our participation phase. The participation phase was about listening to the community, not telling them about climate, but rather listening to their needs and priorities. And then we started to create solutions with those those community needs and priorities in mind. So how do we take climate action that actually solves local community needs and priorities? The two solutions that we've come up with are, one is a cooperative to train and execute on retrofitting, and the other is cycle courier cooperative. Both would enable the creation of local jobs that are kind of underpinned with dignity, and then the climate benefits would be pretty significant out of them. So yeah, I'm happy to share any experiences, because it's been a mixed bag. It's not easy to do real participation, and so yeah, happy to share any experiences we've had and maybe collectively learn from the shortcomings.
That would be wonderful, Sean. And when the People's Transition Report comes out, we will put it in the SharePoint folder. And if there is any public events, you also did a beautiful little illustration by your in-house animator, which I found very interesting, which mapped out how you did the community consultation. If you have that online, you might just put a link there, because I thought it was a very creative way of demonstrating the 7-month community consultation that you did.
Yes, certainly. I will email it to you, or I'll maybe email it to you guys, and you can pop it up in the folder. Maybe that's the best bit, because I'm just on my phone and I don't know how to do it from the phone.
Yeah, you can send it on to myself, Sean, and I'll upload it.
Okay.
Oh, if you run through the chat, Kate, somebody put it up. It's up there already.
Emer Savage put it up there. No relation. Brilliant, thanks, Sean. So I was just thinking, will there be football chants about the environment?
I'd say now that might be pushing it. If we get to that point, I'm just lucky that I haven't been lynched so far. So no, I think it's a really good point, because what we're talking about is reaching communities who don't actually really want to think about these things, and so how we do it is we have to be pretty careful, and I think the entry point of the history of the club and the history of the communities is pretty exciting, because it does open up the ability to have a conversation that maybe people otherwise wouldn't gravitate to. So that's exciting. But a chance, I think there are chants about me, not necessarily positive though, so we won't be including them.
You don't want to be aligned with the referee chants anyway. Brilliant, thank you, Sean. So I don't see any other questions. Is there anything else anybody would like to share? I think it's been really great presentation from the 3 organisations today. I think really brought to life. I mean, we did the evaluation toolkit, but there's nothing like seeing people, trying to use it and, listening to what was difficult, what worked. So as you go through it yourself, please feedback. If there's bits that you're struggling with, you can see there's other projects that, you might be aligned to, or sometimes it's surprising what you learn from projects that you didn't think you were aligned to. So, obviously you've all the names there. Thanks, Alva. So please keep in touch, keep in contact with each other. I think, Tanya, the action that we will take away is looking at some kind of support if you have to do contingency planning about going online where you weren't planned to. And
I think is there a hand raised from Mairead? Sorry, there was a hand raised and lowered. Is there anybody?
No, I was clapping for all the presenters.
Okay.
Brilliant. Okay, so
we're really excited, obviously, to be working with everything from a football club to 12 West Kerry farmers and everything in between. I think the diversity, I hope you felt at the end of this, you got a sense just of the incredible diversity of the projects. We feel we will be leading in terms of the initial kind of community responses that are now going to be rolled out with our colleagues in Pobble who are on this call. And we would be very keen to get any feedback from this workshop. We planned to perhaps meet again. We haven't really agreed that date, but we were thinking perhaps February, and then we will pick another few projects to share how far they've gone on the journey so that we can all learn from each other.
Brilliant. Gurmila Mahagat, August Agwiv, and we'll talk to you again soon, and hopefully everybody has a nice few weeks coming up to Christmas and we all come out of lockdown and it's not an issue at all in January and February. Thanks a million for your time, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. We'll be in touch. Kate, Delaney or myself will be reaching out to you all individually. Have a lovely Christmas.
Thanks a million, everyone.